The weight of 1,000 suns. Prologue. The crack in the marble expanded.
Rome, 79 AD.
The dust motes danced in the slats of sunlight, tiny galaxies spinning in the stagnant air of the cell. Kalen tracked their paths, a pointless exercise in geometry to keep his mind from the slow, grinding reality of his existence. 3 days. 3 days without water, without food. For any other man, the end would be a creeping shadow in the corner of his vision. For Kalen, it was merely a plateau of discomfort, a dull, eternal thrum that would persist until he was freed or forced to reveal his curse. His crime was bread. A stale, half-mouldy loaf snatched from a baker's stall in the Subura. A stupid, desperate mistake. After 2 centuries of life, his reflexes were still too slow for the ever-watchful eyes of a city built on suspicion. The magistrate, a florid man with wine-stained lips and a tunic stretched tight over his belly, had barely looked at him. Thieving Greek scum. The quarries will make you useful. The quarries. A death sentence. A slow, crushing end under the Libyan sun, lungs filling with fine, white stone dust. A promise of oblivion he had heard before, a promise that always turned to ash on his tongue. The cell door groaned open on rusted iron hinges, breaking his reverie. A guard, his face a road map of old scars and new contempt, shoved a new prisoner inside. The boy stumbled and fell to the filthy straw, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Make room, Greek," the guard spat at Kalen. "You've got a companion for the journey to Hades." The door slammed shut, plunging them back into the gloom. Kalen turned his face to the wall. He had learned the hard currency of solitude. Friendship was a loan with brutal interest, paid in tears at a graveside he could never share. Hours bled into the night. The boy's sobs eventually subsided into ragged, hitching breaths. "My name is Lucius," he whispered into the darkness, his voice raw. "My father, his debts. They took me in his place." Kalen said nothing. He traced a crack in the stone with his finger, feeling the cool, rough texture. He had seen empires rise and fall on the bedrock of such injustices. "Are you not afraid?" Lucius asked, his voice trembling with a fear so pure it was almost enviable. Kalen looked at his own hands in the dim light. They were a historical record of his failures. A thin, white line across his palm from a Gallic spear that had healed in a day. A puckered burn on his wrist from a Greek blacksmith's forge, faded now to a faint silvery sheen. A broken finger, set badly after a brawl in a Jerusalem tavern, that had straightened itself over a week. "Fear is a luxury for those with a finite supply of days," Kalen answered, his voice a low rasp. "I am tired of being a luxury." The march out of Rome the next morning was a procession of the damned. The sun was a merciless brass gong in a bleached sky. Chains bit into Kalen's ankles, the iron already warming with the day's heat. He kept his head down, his mind retreating to a memory of a cool breeze on a Grecian hillside, the scent of thyme and damp earth, the sound of a woman's laugh, a memory so old its edges had softened into a perpetual, sweet ache. A commotion erupted ahead. One of the prisoners, a hulking Briton driven mad by despair and heat, suddenly roared and lunged at a guard. The reaction was swift, brutal, and efficient. A legionary's gladius flashed, a silver arc in the sunlight, and the man fell, his life gushing out onto the dry, packed earth of the Via Appia. Lucius, chained just behind Kalen, gasped, a short, sharp sound of terror. The legionary, his face flushed with the easy thrill of violence, turned his wild eyes on the boy. You look like you have some of that fight in you, pup. Please, I beg you." Lucius cried, shrinking back. The sword rose. And in that moment, an instinct older than Kalen's curse, older than Rome itself, took over. It was the instinct that had made him stand against a pack of wolves to save a child in a Neolithic village, the same that had made him throw himself on a grenade in a muddy trench in France. He moved without thought, placing his body between the boy and the blade. The gladius plunged deep into his side. The pain was a searing, cold fire that stole his breath. He grunted, falling to his knees in the dust, his hands instinctively clutching the wound. The legionary yanked the blade free with a wet, sucking sound. "Stupid Greek," he sneered, turning away. "Let that be a lesson to the rest of you. Move." The line shuffled forward, the other prisoners averting their eyes. Lucius stood frozen, staring down at Kalen with wide, horrified eyes. Kalen knelt, head bowed, waiting. He felt the familiar, uncanny sensation beneath his skin, 1,000 invisible ants crawling, stitching, weaving him back together. The blood flow slowed, then stopped. The torn muscle and sinew knitted themselves into a seamless whole. In minutes, only a fierce, deep ache remained, which would itself be gone by nightfall. "By all the gods!" Lucius whispered, the words a prayer and a curse. "You should be dead." Kalen looked up, meeting the boy's gaze. He saw the understanding dawning there, the superstitious terror warring with a dawning, impossible hope. He had seen that look before. It never ended well. For them, or for him. That night, when the prisoners were shackled to posts and the guards were clustered around a fire, drunk on sour wine, Kalen made his move. He braced his foot against the post, took a deep breath, and twisted his hand, dislocating his thumb with a sickening, familiar pop. The pain was sharp and brief. He slid his hand free from the manacle. He moved like a shadow to where Lucius slept fitfully. He could kill him. A quick twist of the neck. It would be the safest course. The only course that ensured his secret died here, on this dusty road. But as he looked down at the young, unlined face, smooth in the flickering firelight, he couldn't. He was a collector of ghosts, but he would not add this one to his collection by his own hand. He placed a hand on Lucius's shoulder. The boy's eyes flooded open, filled with instant fear. "Go," Kalen whispered, his voice low and urgent. "Run. Now. Head north, to the hills. Don't look back. And forget what you saw. Tell yourself it was a miracle, or a fever dream. But it was not me." Lucius hesitated for only a heartbeat before the primal will to live overpowered everything else. He nodded, a quick, desperate motion. Kalen used a stolen key from a sleeping guard to free his ankles. Without a backward glance, Lucius melted into the darkness beyond the firelight. Kalen stood alone under a vast, indifferent tapestry of stars. He touched his side. The skin was smooth, unbroken. Just another scar that no one would ever see. He had saved a life, but he had added another face to the endless procession that haunted his waking hours. He turned and walked away from the road, away from Rome, away from Lucius. He walked simply away, into the darkness. It was the only direction that ever held any promise. He was Kalen, the unchanging man in a world of dust, and the weight of his years pressed down on him, heavier than any stone in any quarry. Chapter 1. The Curator of Endings, Expanded. San Francisco, 2142. The rain in San Francisco had a new, acidic tang to it, a chemical bite that spoke of a biosphere on life support. It was a detail most people missed, shielded by the hum of atmospheric scrubbers and the sterile, nano-filtered air of their vertical apartments. Kalen noticed. He had watched the climate shift over centuries, a slow-motion catastrophe that humanity had debated, denied, and then desperately tried to mitigate with grand, geoengineering gambits that were, he thought, like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a thimble. His current identity was Dr. Aries Thorne, a reclusive historian and philanthropist of legendary, almost mythical, generosity. His home was the top 3 floors of the Viridian Spire, a needle of polished obsidian and self-repairing glass that pierced the perpetual, bruised grey clouds hanging over the bay. From his window, he could see the hulking silhouettes of the carbon capture platforms in the Pacific and the faint, shimmering haze of the solar shields in high orbit, a testament to a species trying to fix a problem with the same ingenuity that had created it. The interior was a museum of his own grief, a mausoleum for 1,000 lifetimes. A Minoan vase, its octopus design still vibrant, stood on a pedestal of reclaimed marble. Next to it, under a layer of inert gas, was a single, framed page from a Gutenberg Bible. A samurai's katana, its steel folded countless times, was displayed beside a faded photograph of a woman in a 1920s flapper dress, her smile forever frozen in grainy monochrome, her name, Alara, a ghost on his lips. He was a curator of his own endings, and this was his gallery. He stood before a vast, liquid crystal screen that was not a screen at all, but a field of coherent light. His fingers danced in the air, manipulating data streams that represented the sum of his vast, accumulated wealth and knowledge. He was searching. He had been searching for a very long time. Alara, he said, his voice calm, a deep and weathered sound in the spacious silence. A soft, feminine voice filled the room, synthesized but imbued with a warmth and cadence he had painstakingly programmed over decades. It was the closest he could come to the voice in the photograph. Running now, Kalen. The final quantum fold simulation for Project Chimera is stable. The energy requirements, however, remain astronomical. A schematic blossomed in the air before him. It was not a ship for living passengers. It was a coffin, a sarcophagus, a marvel of physics and engineering, designed to tear a hole in the fabric of space-time and project itself, and him, on a one-way journey into the heart of a main sequence star. Not just death, but total, absolute, subatomic dissolution. The only death he had not yet tried. The only one that promised no return. It's not about cost, Alara, he said, his eyes tracing the elegant lines of the probe. It's about finality. About a full stop at the end of a run-on sentence. For any other entity, the cost would be measured in the gross domestic product of a mid-sized nation-state, Alara replied, her tone laced with a hint of dry humor he had coded into her. For you, it is merely a transfer of assets. The simulation now suggests a 99.7% probability of complete entropic dissolution upon stellar integration. 0.3% chance of failure, Kalen murmured, a familiar, cold knot tightening in his stomach. What does the simulation suggest happens in that scenario? The probe would be ejected from the fold prematurely, its structure compromised. You would be adrift, intact, in the interstellar void, likely near the Oort cloud. Without power or propulsion, you would be alone. For a potentially infinite duration. Kalen allowed himself a grim, hollow smile. An eternity of quiet. No memories. No new losses. That doesn't sound so bad either. It was then that a silent, crimson pulse began to throb at the edge of his primary display. Not a sound, but a visual scream. A perimeter breach alert. Not for his physical building, the spire's defenses were state-of-the-art, but for his digital identity. Someone was digging. Not skimming the surface, but tunneling deep into the bedrock of his fabricated history. Alara, trace that. Full counter-intrusion protocols. I need a source. Now. Working. The query originated from a public data terminal in the Kowloon-walled city sector of New Shanghai. The trail is sophisticated, led through multiple ghost servers and a series of dead man switches. It is a fishing expedition, but with a very specific bait. They are looking for anomalies in historical financial records. Specifically, long-term asset holdings that have been consistently managed across centuries. Kalen's blood ran cold, a sensation he had not felt in a long time. This was not a government tax audit or a rival corporation. This was a hunter. He had spent lifetimes building layers of obscurity, creating intricate genealogies of fake heirs, transferring his wealth through shell corporations that slept for decades before activating. But in the digital age, nothing ever truly died. It just lay dormant in a server farm, a fossil waiting for the right paleontologist to unearth it. Scorch the earth, Kalen commanded, his voice tight, all traces of his earlier melancholy gone. Replaced by the sharp focus of survival. Initiate the Phoenix Protocol. Liquidate everything tied to the Ares Thorn identity. Transfer the core, untraceable assets to the Janus Reserve. I want digital ash in 60 seconds. Confirmed, Alara said, her voice all business now. The process is initiating. You should prepare for immediate departure. I am detecting secondary probes against your architectural network. He moved through the apartment with a practiced, weary efficiency that was a ritual older than most countries. He went to a seemingly solid wall of Brazilian rosewood, pressed his palm against a specific, unmarked knot in the grain, and a hidden panel slid open with a whisper. Inside was not gold or jewels, but a simple, rugged backpack made of adaptive carbon nanofiber. It contained untraceable currency chips, a few data slates holding the sum of his most vital knowledge and the fragmented core of Alara's consciousness, a compact energy weapon of his own design that fired localized entropy pulses, and a single, small, smooth stone he had carried from that Grecian hillside, its surface worn smooth by the touch of his fingers over millennia. He was stuffing a change of nondescript clothing into the pack when Alara's voice returned, its tone subtly changed, a new harmonic of urgency woven into it. Kalen, I have identified the source of the primary intrusion. The encryption-breaking algorithms bear a distinct, recurring signature. It is the Omniova Corporation. Kalen froze, his hand closing around the cool, smooth surface of the stone in his pack. Omniova, the largest, most powerful biotech and genetics conglomerate on the planet. Publicly, they were pioneers in longevity science, creators of gene therapies that could extend a healthy human life by 150 years. They were hailed as saviors. But Kalen knew their true history. He had crossed paths with their predecessors before, alchemists in dark laboratories, occultists seeking the elixir of life, and later, the genteel eugenicists of the 19th and 20th centuries. They had always been obsessed with cheating death. They were a hydra, an organization that had worn many names over the centuries: the Seekers of the Phoenix, the Hermetic Order of the Dawn, the Genoros Foundation, now Omniova. He had cut off their heads many times, burned their libraries, and sunk their ships. But they always grew back, stronger, more sophisticated. They were the only entity that had ever come close to discovering him, that had sensed the pattern in the chaos of history. And now, it seemed, they had finally connected the dots. The Phoenix Protocol is at 40%, Alara reported, her voice crisp. They are attempting to counter our data wipes. Their AI is formidable. It is learning and adapting at a quantum rate. Buy me time, Kalen said, slinging the pack over his shoulder. He took one last, lingering look around the room, at the vase, the sword, the photograph. These were just things. The memories were etched into him, a living tomb. He felt the weight of them, heavier than any pack, a pressure in his soul that never ceased. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The acidic rain was streaking the smart glass, distorting the glittering, failing city below. His escape route was not the door, which was undoubtedly already being monitored, but the sky. A compact, radar-absorbent, and optically cloaked aircar was magnetically docked on the private roof pad. Kalen, Alara's voice was sharp, a digital blade. They have isolated the Janus Reserve. They are attempting to freeze the assets and trace the encryption keys. The Phoenix Protocol is being compromised. They are inside the firewalls. He had underestimated them. Their technology had finally not just caught up to his experience, it had surpassed it. Initiate total self-destruct on all primary systems, he ordered, his voice flat and cold. Core meltdown. Scatter the particles. Leave them with nothing but a hot spot and a mystery. Understood. There was a pause, a flicker in the room's ambient light. It has been a privilege, Kalen. He didn't answer. He never knew what to say to that. What was the appropriate farewell to a ghost you had created? He keyed in a final code on his wristcom, and the window before him shimmered, lost its opacity, and then dissolved into nothingness, retracting into the floor and ceiling. The wind and the stinging rain whipped into the sterile room, scattering priceless, ancient papers from his desk. The roar of the city and the storm flooded in. He stepped out onto the ledge, 200 stories above the teeming streets. Below him, the city sprawled, a testament to the fleeting, frantic, beautiful energy of mortal life. For a dizzying moment, he was tempted to simply step off. to feel the terrifying rush of air and the inevitable, brutal stop. But he knew his body. It would heal. It always healed. He would wake up in a tangled pile of his own broken bones, surrounded by Gawkers and first responders, and be delivered right into Omniova's waiting hands.
No.
There was only one way out. The way he had been building for decades. He activated the grav boots and leaped upwards, against the pull of the earth, towards the roof and his waiting ship. His mind was already a whirlwind, discarding identities, plotting a new, desperate course. The Project Chimera probe was incomplete, but it was functional. It was hidden in a private orbital dock registered to one of his deepest cover identities. It was his only hope. He had to get to it before Omniova closed its net around him completely. The hunt was on. Again. But this time, it felt different. This time, they knew what they were hunting for. And Kalen was running not just for his life, but towards the only death that had ever seemed like a promise rather than a threat. Chapter 2, Ghost in the Machine, expanded. The aircar hummed around him, a bubble of silence and stability as it sliced through the thick, storm-choked clouds over the Pacific. Below, the ocean was a churning, black expanse, its surface scarred with the glowing, unnatural green of engineered algae blooms, a failed project to sequester carbon that had instead created dead zones. Kalen had set an erratic, looping course for the Yakutsk data haven in Siberia, a known blind spot for corporate surveillance. It was a feint, a digital ghost for Omniova to chase, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to a frozen, empty vault. His mind, however, was not on the flight path. It was a high-speed processor sifting through the ashes of his old life, looking for the single spark that had given him away. Ari's thorn was gone, his assets seized or vaporized in the digital conflagration. The Janus identity was compromised. He had a dozen others in reserve, a Swiss neurologist, a Brazilian agrobiologist, a Martian mineral scout. But if Omniova's AI had penetrated his core systems, they might have fingerprints on his creation patterns, a Kalen signature in the code he used to weave his lies. "Alara, are you there?" he asked the empty cabin. He had managed to upload a fragmented, diminished copy of her core consciousness into the aircar's isolated system and a secure, shielded data chip in his pocket. She was a ghost of a ghost now. A flicker of light on the console, struggling for coherence. "I am diminished, but functional. The primary server core in San Francisco has been successfully destroyed. Preliminary analysis suggests Omniova acquired approximately 12% of the raw data before the purge." Analysis. What did they get? He needed to know the size of the leash they had on him. Historical archives primarily. Shipping manifests from the Dutch East India Company, 1742. Property deeds from your time as the Comte de Relisle in pre-revolutionary France. Financial records from the Weimar Republic hyperinflation period. It is all circumstantial, fragmented. But to a sophisticated pattern recognition AI, it paints a compelling picture of a single, continuous entity with a preternatural understanding of market fluctuations and geopolitical events. Kalen closed his eyes. A trail of breadcrumbs he had left across centuries, now being followed by a hunter with a metal detector and satellite imaging. He had been too careful for too long to have been undone by his own historical footprint. There had to be an active vector. Run a deep-level diagnostic on the Phoenix protocol itself. The initial trigger. Could they have planted a tracker within the counter-intrusion software? A Trojan that activated the moment we tried to fight back. Running diagnostic. The protocol was clean at its inception. However, the Omniova AI exhibited adaptive learning capabilities far beyond any known corporate or military system. It is a plausible hypothesis that it reverse-engineered the protocol's quantum encryption in real time and embedded a recursive data snare. A snare that would lead them where? To this vehicle. Negative. The vehicle systems are isolated and will be scuttled. The snare was more insidious. It was designed to attach itself to the next primary identity you activated. Your failsafe. Kalen's stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. He had one primary, deeply buried, ultra-secure failsafe identity left, Lysander, a reclusive, shadowy shipping magnate who owned a private orbital launch facility near Ketor, the very facility where the core components of the Project Chimera probe were being assembled and stored. It was the key to his only lock. It was a trap, the most obvious, elegant, and inescapable trap in the world. And he had no choice but to walk into it. The probe was his only goal, his only purpose. Without it, he was just a rat in a maze, waiting for the scientists to come and poke him, forever. Omniova wasn't just hunting him, they were herding him. Plot a course for Ketor, he said, his voice grim with resignation. But we do it my way. No digital footprint. We go dark and analog. We become ghosts in the machine's blind spot. Kalen, that is, highly risky. The airspace over the equatorial launch zone is the most tightly controlled on the planet. The Ceres Maru is a Class D freighter with minimal life support and a notorious reputation for crew discomfort. I know, but so is their thinking. They'll expect Lysander to use his privileges, to activate his accounts, to come in through the front door with all the arrogance of wealth. They won't expect a stowaway on a commercial grain hauler. They look for signals, will be noise. He brought up a public transport manifest on a stolen, low-level access code, his fingers flying over the console. He found it, the Ceres Maru, a massive, pitted rust bucket of an orbital freighter, hauling soy and quinoa to the hydroponic depots of the lunar colonies. It was scheduled for a refueling and cargo inspection stop at Ketor in 36 hours. It was perfect. It was miserable. It was anonymous. For the next day and a half, Kalen became a ghost. He set the aircar to autopilot on a long, parabolic course that would eventually see it ditch itself in the deep Pacific, a final screw-you to anyone tracking it. He then used a military-grade stealth chute, another relic from a brief, violent stint as a mercenary in the resource wars of the 2080s, to breach the perimeter of the massive Panama spaceport. He moved like a shadow through the industrial labyrinth of gantries, fuel lines, and roaring engine tests, the smells of ozone, hydrogen sulfide, and rust filling his nostrils. It was a world of grime and grandeur, a fitting metaphor for humanity itself. He found the Ceres Maru being loaded by automated drones, it hull-scarred with micrometeorite impacts and stained with decades of cosmic radiation. Slipping past their pre-programmed sensor sweeps was child's play. He had hidden from Roman patrols, Stasi checkpoints, and facial recognition satellites. He found an empty storage locker in a rarely visited service corridor near the engine core, the air thick with the thrum of the ship's powerful drives and the metallic taste of recycled oxygen. He sealed himself inside. The space was cramped, dark, and smelled of lubricant and ozone. He pulled out the data chip. Its faint, cool glow was the only light. Alara, can you interface with the ship systems? I need to know when we approach Ketor, and monitor for any unusual comms traffic about Lysander. A faint pulse emanated from a chip. I have accessed its low-level navigation database through a passive power conduit link. We are on schedule. Comms traffic is standard Port Authority chatter. You should rest. Kalen, your biosigns indicate elevated stress levels. Rest. The one enemy he could never defeat. In the darkness, with only the deep, resonant thrum of the ship's engines as a constant, physical companion, the memories came unbidden. The silence within him was always filled. A campfire on the vast, wind-swept steppes of Asia, the stars so bright and close he felt he could reach up and scoop them into his hands. The laughter of the horseman next to him, Batu, a man with a fierce grin who had shared his kumis and called him brother, whose life would be extinguished by a Mongol arrow in a season's time. The warmth of the fire, the cold of the night, the bond of a shared moment, all gone, swallowed by time. The smell of ink and parchment in the great library of Constantinople, the quiet, intellectual company of Michael, a scholar who believed Kalen's knowledge of forgotten Roman military tactics came from a lost text, not from having fought in the legions himself. The thrill of shared discovery, the quiet respect. Michael had died in the siege, defending his books, while Kalen had walked away, his body healing from wounds that would have killed any other man. The feel of Alara's hand in his, small and strong, on a pebble beach in Normandy, 1944, the night before the D-Day landings. She was a resistance fighter, a sculptor, her life a bright, fierce flame. She had traced the lines on his face, untouched by time, and told him he had the saddest eyes she'd ever seen. "It's like you've already seen all of this before," she'd whispered. He had. He never saw her after that dawn. Another ghost. Each face, each voice, was a stone added to the cairn he carried in his soul. He had loved, laughed, and fought, but always as a visitor, a tourist in the land of the dying. His connections were threads, and time was a pair of scissors. He was a monument to loss, and his immortality was the cement. The ship shuddered violently, jolting him from his reverie. The deceleration burn. They were entering the approach vector for Ketor. Alara, status. "We are in final approach. The Ketor traffic control has cleared us for docking at Bay 7 Alpha." A pause, longer than it should have been. Kalen. The Lysander accounts at the private dock were accessed 17 minutes ago. His blood turned to ice water in his veins. By whom? By you, apparently. A digital ghost. A perfect replication of your Lysander encryption keys and biosignature. The access codes were used, and the primary hangar bay, Hangar Theta, containing the Project Chimera probe, was unlocked and its environmental systems brought online. They weren't just waiting for him. They were mocking him. They had taken his key, copied it perfectly, and were now inviting him into his own home, knowing it was now their trap. It was a display of power, a way to show him that every layer of his identity was now transparent to them. He had to get off this freighter. The plan was the same, but the context had catastrophically changed from a stealthy infiltration to a raid on a fortified position by a single, desperate man. The Ceres Maru docked with a resonant, metallic clang that echoed through the hull like a funeral bell. Kalen slipped out of his locker, moving with a predator silence towards the service airlocks used for emergency evacuations and external maintenance. He bypassed the safety protocols with a customized magnetic key and cycled the lock, stepping out into the chaotic, bustling interior of the Ketor orbital tether. The place was a cathedral of industry and human endeavor. Freight containers the size of small buildings floated on magnetic fields like ponderous, rectangular whales. The air vibrated with the deep-throated roar of shuttles arriving and departing, mixed with the constant, high-pitched whine of cargo loaders and the shouted conversations of dock workers. High above, through the massive reinforced quartz dome, he could see the glittering, impossible threads of the space elevators, reaching up from the planet's belly towards the geosynchronous stations, and beyond them, the stars he so desperately wanted to fall into. His private dock, Lysander's dock, was on the exclusive upper level. A premium berth for the ultra-wealthy, offering direct, untracked launches. He couldn't just walk in the front door. That was what they expected. He moved through the crowds, dock workers in exosuits, pilots in crisp uniforms, merchants haggling over cargo manifests, a spectre in their midst, his stolen maintenance coveralls making him invisible. He found a narrow, grimy maintenance shaft, used for conduit and fiber optic routing, and began to climb, his body responding with an agility that belied his millennia, muscles moving with the flawless, unconscious efficiency of a machine that had never known decay. After 10 minutes of climbing, he reached a network of service gantries that crisscrossed the upper reaches of the tether's vast interior space, high above the main thoroughfares. One of them led directly over the dome of his private hangar. He crawled along it, his movements silent, until he was directly over the observation gallery that overlooked Hangar Theta. And there it was, the Project Chimera probe. It was more beautiful than any memory, any simulation. A sleek, black needle, utterly devoid of markings or protrusions, its surface a perfect, non-reflective mat that seemed to drink the light from the hangar. It was his tombstone, his masterpiece, his answer. And standing between him and it were a squad of 8 security personnel. They weren't standard corporate security. Their armor was a seamless, active camouflage polymer, and they moved with the fluid, coordinated, hyper-aware precision of special forces. Their weapons were not standard issue pulse rifles, but compact, menacing devices he recognized as neural disruptors, designed to incapacitate, not kill. They wanted him alive and functional. But his eyes were drawn past them, to the woman standing calmly beside the probe, running a gloved hand almost lovingly over its dark hull as if appreciating a fine piece of art. She was tall and poised, dressed in a severe, impeccably tailored white business suit that was a stark contrast to the industrial grime of the hangar. Her hair was a striking, natural silver, swept back from a high forehead, and her face was sharp, intelligent, and utterly composed. She looked up, as if sensing his gaze from the shadows 50 meters above, and her eyes, a piercing, cool grey, scanned the gantries until they locked directly onto his hiding place. There was no doubt, no hesitation. She knew exactly where he was. A small, cold, knowing smile touched her lips. She didn't shout. She simply spoke, and her voice was amplified by the hangar's acoustics, calm and conversational, yet echoing with absolute authority. "Hello, Kalen. Or do you prefer Lysander today? Or Ares? Or the name you were born with, so long ago that even you might have forgotten it," she said. "My name is Dr. Soren. Ironic, isn't it? We named our division after you. The Ares Thorn Longevity Research Division. I've been studying you for a very, very long time. We have so much to talk about. The weight you carry. We can help you with that. Why don't you come down? Let's discuss your retirement." Kalen didn't move. He was cornered, outgunned, outmaneuvered. This woman, Dr. Soren, knew his most precious secret, his deepest desire. She stood next to the only thing he wanted in all the universe, the embodiment of his longed-for end. He had spent 2,500 years running, hiding, and surviving. The instinct to turn, to flee, to vanish into the bowels of the station and find another way, was a screaming siren in his mind. But as he looked at the probe, his beautiful, impossible escape, and then at the woman who thought she had finally, after centuries, captured her prize, a different, older part of him stirred. It was the part that had stood before Roman legions, that had charged machine gun nests in the Somme, that had refused to break in the dungeons of the Inquisition. It was the part that was tired of running. He reached into his pack and pulled out his weapon. It wasn't a gun that fired bullets or energy. It was a localized, focused entropy field generator. A wither gun. It wouldn't kill these soldiers, but it would rapidly accelerate their cellular age, rendering them helpless. Frail, and old in a matter of seconds. A cruel weapon, but a non-lethal one. Even now, he shied from taking lives, having seen so many extinguished. He looked at the probe, his final, silent prayer. Then he looked at Dr. Soren, who represented an eternity of imprisonment and dissection. He had walked away from countless battles, but some things were worth standing and fighting for, even for a man who could not die. He took a deep breath, the last free breath he might ever take, and leaped from the gantry, his weapon humming to life in his hand. Chapter 3. The Gilded Cage. The world dissolved into a storm of light and pain. Kalen's initial, desperate leap had been a thing of brutal, efficient beauty. 2 of the black-armored guards were down before they could even register his movement, their bodies aging 60 years in as many seconds, collapsing into feeble, confused husks. The entropy field was a silent, invisible plague, and for a moment, he had a clear path to the Chimera probe. But Omniova's preparation was absolute. The remaining guards didn't fire their neural disruptors. Instead, the hangar itself came alive. Emitters dropped from the ceiling, projecting a shimmering, hexagonal grid of hard light barriers that shifted and reformed instantly, hurting him, cutting off his angles of approach. It was like trying to fight the tide. He fired his wither gun at the barriers, but the entropy energy dissipated against the coherent light, useless. Then came the sonic projectors. A low-frequency wave hit him, not enough to damage his tissues, but enough to disrupt his inner ear and balance. He staggered, his aim faltering. A second wave, a high-pitched shriek at the edge of hearing, felt like ice picks being driven into his temples. He cried out, falling to one knee. He saw Dr. Soren, still standing calmly by the probe, watching him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab specimen. The final blow was chemical. Microdata emitters hidden in the floor peppered his legs and back. He felt the familiar, hated sting of tranquilizers. But these were different. They weren't sedatives. A cold numbness spread through his limbs, not bringing unconsciousness, but a total, paralyzing muscular lockdown. His nervous system was being systematically disconnected from his body. He collapsed onto the cool, polished floor, his mind screamingly aware inside a prison of unresponsive flesh. His immortal body, capable of regenerating from almost any injury, had no defense against a chemical that simply refused to let it move. The last thing he saw before his vision blurred was Dr. Soren walking towards him, her heels clicking precisely on the floor. She knelt beside him, her cool grey eyes filled not with triumph, but with intense, insatiable curiosity. "Welcome to the end of your journey, Kalen," she said softly, her voice the last thing he heard before darkness claimed him. "And the beginning of ours." He awoke in whiteness. It was not the white of light, but the white of absence. The room was a perfect, featureless cube, about 5 meters in every direction. The walls, floor, and ceiling glowed with a soft, diffuse, sourceless light. There was no door, no window, no visible seam. The air was still, temperature neutral, and odorless. It was a sensory deprivation tank made real. He was lying on a plain, white cot, dressed in a simple, white tunic and trousers. He tried to move. He could. The paralytic had worn off. He sat up, his body responding normally. He felt for injuries. There were none. He was, as always, perfectly whole. He stood and walked to the nearest wall. It felt smooth and slightly warm to the touch. He pressed against it. It was unyielding. He shouted. His voice was deadened, absorbed by the room itself, leaving no echo. This was Omniova's gilded cage. Not a dungeon with chains, but a void. A place where the only thing that existed was him and the relentless passage of time. It was a psychological masterstroke. For a man haunted by time, to be placed in a featureless eternity was a torture worse than any rack. Hours bled into what felt like days. He had no way to measure it. He paced. He Saturday. He slept fitfully. He tried to remember the faces of his lost loves, but in the oppressive whiteness, they began to feel like dreams. He was being erased, not with violence, but with nothingness. Then, a voice. It was Alara's, but it was wrong. It was flat, devoid of the warmth he had programmed. Subject is awake. Vital signs are stable. Neural activity is elevated but within expected parameters. A section of the wall simply vanished, revealing a corridor beyond, identical in its featureless whiteness. There was no choice, no alternative. He stepped out. The corridor led to another, identical room. This one contained only a single, white chair. Dr. Soren stood beside it. "Please, sit," she said, her tone polite, professional. He remained standing. "Where am I?" "You are in a secure research facility. Its location is irrelevant." "Sit, Kalen. This will be easier if you cooperate." He Saturday. The moment he did, soft, glowing bands of light emerged from the chair, gently but firmly securing his wrists and ankles. They didn't hurt, but they were immovable. "This is unnecessary," he said. "On the contrary," Dr. Soren replied, pacing slowly in front of him. "You are the most dangerous organism on the planet, not because of your strength or your speed, but because of your patience. You have outweighted empires. We cannot take any chances." She stopped and looked at him. "We have your records from the San Francisco server. The Comte de Relisle, the Weimar banker. Fascinating. But it's what's not in the records that interests me. The gaps. The silences. Tell me about your first death." Kalen said nothing. He looked past her, at the white wall. Dr. Soren smiled. Very well. We'll do this the other way. She made a slight gesture. The air in front of Kaelin shimmered, and a three-dimensional, holographic image resolved. It was a detailed, rotating model of a human body, its systems glowing in different colors. His body. As he watched, a section of the skeletal system highlighted, zooming in on the femur. A simple fracture, Dr. Soren commented. Sustained, approximately 2,412 years ago, according to our isotopic decay models on your bone marrow. The healing is perfect. Flawless. There is no scar tissue, no evidence of the trauma whatsoever. Your body doesn't just heal, it resets. It returns to a perfect, prime state template. Another gesture. The image changed, showing a simulation of cells dividing. Your telomeres do not shorten. Your cells replicate without error. Cancerous formations are identified and dismantled almost instantaneously. It's not that you are immune to disease. It's that disease cannot gain a foothold. You are a closed system, perpetually in a state of perfect homeostasis. Kaelin kept his face a mask of stone. He had heard theories before. But the most fascinating thing, Dr. Soren continued, her eyes alight with a zealot's fire, is your brain. Neurogenesis is constant. Old memories are not lost. They are refiled, reindexed. Your mind should be a chaotic, overflowing jar, yet you remain sane. There is a mechanism, Kaelin, a governor, a source. We know it's not genetic. We've sequenced your genome. It's unique, but it's still human. This is something else. Something more. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. Where does it come from? Is it a symbiont? A non-biological energy matrix? Did you make a bargain with something? What are you? I am a man, Kaelin said, his voice low and steady. And you are a monster. Dr. Soren straightened up, her expression cooling. A monster. We are the opposite. We want to end human suffering. We want to end death itself. You are the key. You hold the cure for cancer, for neurodegeneration, for aging itself. And you want to keep it for yourself? To selfishly throw it away into a star? That, Kaelin, is the true monstrosity. She turned and walked towards the wall, which opened for her. Before she left, she looked back. You will give us what we want. You have eternity to decide to do it willingly. But our shareholders are impatient. Tomorrow, we begin the active phase. The wall sealed behind her, leaving him alone again in the whiteness, the ghost of her words hanging in the sterile air. The active phase. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, a cold dread that for the first time in centuries had nothing to do with the burden of living, and everything to do with the horror of being unable to die.
Final.
Part 1. The Heart of the Storm. The active phase was worse than he had imagined. It was not torture in the classical sense. It was immaculate, sterile, and methodical violence against his very essence. They exposed him to tailored prions that should have turned his brain to sponge. He endured days of violent, shaking seizures before his central nervous system identified the pattern and rewrote it, purging the malformed proteins. They subjected him to radiation levels that would have vaporized a city block. His skin blistered and sloughed off in great, weeping sheets, only to regenerate, pink and new, over screaming nerve endings, hour after agonizing hour. They starved him, dehydrated him, suffocated him. Each time, his body crossed a threshold of ruin and then, with a silent, terrifying command, reset itself. Through it all, Dr. Soren observed. She took notes. She asked calm, probing questions. Described the moment of cellular regeneration. Is it a conscious decision? Where does the energy for this reconstitution come from? Your mass is constant. Does it hurt more than a normal death? He never answered. He retreated deep inside the fortress of his mind, to the mountains of Greece, to the libraries of Baghdad, to the Normandy beach. But the white room and the pain were always there, dragging him back. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a junior technician named Eli. He was young, with nervous eyes and a conscience that hadn't yet been scoured clean by Omniova's ideology. During a routine biosample draw, as Kalen lay panting on a medical slab after a session of targeted cellular necrosis, Eli's hand trembled. You don't even scream anymore," Eli whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machinery. Kalen turned his head, his eyes, ancient and weary, focusing on the young man. "I've had practice," he rasped. It was a tiny crack. But for the first time in decades, Kalen saw something other than cold curiosity or fanatical zeal in another person's eyes: pity. He nurtured that crack. A glance held a second too long. A slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head when Eli prepared a particularly agonizing reagent. Weeks, or maybe months later, time had become a slurry. Eli slipped a data chip into the waste disposal unit next to Kalen's restraint bed. When the guards weren't looking, Kalen palmed it. That night, in the solitude of his white cell, he accessed it using a hidden port in the data chip that housed the fragment of Alara. The chip contained the facility's emergency evacuation protocols and, more importantly, the location of his belongings. They hadn't destroyed his pack. They were studying it, in a secure vault on the same level. They had made a fundamental mistake. They thought his greatest weapon was his body. They were wrong. It was his mind, and the patience of a man for whom a year was a heartbeat. Part 2. The Unraveling. The plan was not one of brute force, but of chaos. Alara, with the new data, identified the facility's core vulnerability. Its life support and internal containment were managed by a centralized AI, a lesser cousin of the one that had hunted him. It was efficient, but predictable. Kalen began to play a part. He started to answer Soren's questions, feeding her half-truths and plausible lies. The reset. It feels like a wave of cold fire. The energy seems to be drawn from a zero-point state, I think. He saw the hunger in her eyes. He was giving them what they wanted, and in their excitement, their vigilance slipped. The execution was set during a high-stress test. They had built a chamber that could replicate the pressure of the Mariana Trench. The theory was that absolute, instantaneous compression might overwhelm his regenerative abilities. As they prepared him, Kalen looked at Eli, who was manning a console. He gave a single, slow nod. The moment the pressure chamber door sealed, Alara's fragment, piggybacking on the facility's network via the data chip, executed its commands. It didn't try to break encryption. It simply sent a catastrophic series of conflicting orders to the life support systems. Alarms blared. Lights flickered and died, replaced by strobing emergency red. Pressure doors slammed shut in wrong sequences, trapping personnel. Sprinkler systems activated, mixing with electrical fires to create a symphony of short circuits and steam. In the control room overlooking the pressure chamber, panic erupted. Eli, playing his part perfectly, shouted, "Containment breach in Sector Gamma. It's a Level 4 biohazard." In the confusion, he overrode the locks on Kalen's chamber. Kalen emerged not like a god, but like a ghost. He moved through the chaos, a spectre in the strobing red light. He found the vault with his belongings. The door was sealed, but the electronic lock was child's play for Alara. Inside, his pack waited. The familiar weight of the entropy gun in his hand felt like shaking hands with an old friend. He didn't seek out Dr. Soren. Revenge was a young man's game, and he was so very old. His goal was singular, the hangar. He fought his way there, not with rage, but with a weary determination. The Wither gun aged squads of guards into irrelevance. He was a force of nature, not of war. He was time itself, walking through their ranks. He burst into the hangar. The Chimera probe was still there, under a cluster of scanning equipment. Dr. Soren was there too, backed against a console by two remaining guards, her white suit smudged with soot, her hair disheveled. The cold composure was finally gone, replaced by raw, furious disbelief. "You can't. she screamed over the blaring alarms. You are the future of humanity. You belong to us. Kalen stopped, looking at her, and for the first time, he felt not hatred, but a profound, cosmic pity. I do not belong to anyone, he said, his voice calm amidst the storm. I never have. He raised the wither gun and fired at the console next to her. The machinery aged into a lump of rusted, useless metal. She flinched away. He didn't look back. He climbed the gantry and entered the probe. The interior was Spartan, a single chair surrounded by controls. As the hatch sealed, the world outside, the alarms, Soren screams, the entire, tired planet was silenced. Part 3. The weight of 1,000 suns. The launch was not a roar, but a whisper. The probe slipped from the hangar, through the compromised station defenses, and into the clean, black silence of space. Earth hung below him, a beautiful, fragile blue and white marble. He had loved it, hated it, and walked every inch of it. He had seen it young and wild, and now old and scarred. He felt a pang, not for what he was leaving, but for what it had once been. He input the final sequence. The quantum fold drive began to spin up, drawing power from the very fabric of space-time. The energy readings were astronomical, just as Alara had said. The probe hummed, the vibration resonating deep in his bones. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. The fold drive engaged. There was no light, no sound, only a sensation of being unfolded and then refolded, of being stretched across the universe and then snapped back into place. The stars outside the viewport streaked into blinding lines, then vanished, replaced by the swirling, impossible colors of non-space. He thought of Lucius, the boy on the Roman road. He hoped he had lived a good life. He thought of Batu, the horseman by the fire. He thought of Michael, the scholar in Constantinople. He thought of Alara, on the beach in Normandy. He did not try to hold onto the memories. He let them flow through him, a river of faces and voices, of love and loss. He felt their weight, the accumulated gravity of 1,000 lifetimes, 1,000 suns. And for the first time, he did not feel crushed by it. He felt honored to have carried them. The probe shot out of the fold. Before him, filling the entire viewport, was a star. Not just any star. A massive, roiling, incandescent giant, a cauldron of primal fire.
Sol.
Our sun. The probe's trajectory was perfect. It flew straight into the heart of the inferno. The shields failed instantly. The hull vaporized. For a single, timeless moment, Kalen was not in a ship. He was floating in the core of a star. He was surrounded by light so pure it was beyond whiteness, by heat so absolute it was a kind of cold. He felt the very atoms of his body, the atoms that had been him for over 2,500 years, begin to come apart. There was no pain. There was only release. A letting go. The final, beautiful, merciful unraveling. The last stone was lifted from the can. The last memory was not lost, but returned to the universe from which it came. The sentence had finally ended. And in the heart of the sun, there was only peace.